earliest days of my memory, I guess I've been lucky, and that is I've always known that I wanted to be a historian. My grandfather asked me when I was 8 years old, what did I want to be when I grew up, and I told him I want to be a history professor. And he kind of laughed it off and said, no, really, what do you want to be? I said, I want to be a history professor. And so I guess I've done exactly what I wanted to do. And it's fun for me to be able to share with you all the research that I did, but also hopefully maybe give you some ideas about the South and how the South changes when you begin to look at it through the context of the people who actually live in it. And I was lucky enough to be able to find, I guess lucky is a relatively loaded word, but I found someone who represents a lot of the South of the 1840s, 50s, and 60s, and whose voice resonated with Southerners. And so, let me begin by saying that you are looking at one of the few known pictures of James Dunwoody Bronson DeBow. How about that for a mouthful? J.D.B. DeBow, James DeBow. He was and I'm going to get into this here, but I just wanted to kind of give you the context of these two pictures. He was the preeminent Southern editor before the Civil War. He was the man who who edited DeBow's Review, which would have been the equivalent of reading the Wall Street Journal today. That it was a business journal that had some culture, that had social issues, that talked about different aspects of the South, written for Southerners, written by Southerners. And so you have to realize is that this is going to be really the anchor of a lot of ideas because it offered a place for people of like mind, and we'll talk about that too, to publish their articles. Now, before I get into my story, I also want to tell you one other aspect of it. I read through every issue from 1846 to 1867, 12 issues a year, 110 pages a month, and as boring as it gets in terms of prose. I have a 10-year-old, and he one time asked me, is there anyone else that's read that much of DeBow's Review? And my response was, I hope not. Because in reality, the ideas in here are wonderful for a historian, but as a lay person who might like history, they're not really accessible. So I did a lot of that. But what I wanted to do is not only look at DeBow's ideas, but I also wanted to see how his readers responded to his ideas. So what I did is I went back and I recreated, I found 2,000 names of people who subscribed to DeBow's Review. Of those 2,000, I was able to identify and do research on 1,507 of them. So I went back and researched 1,500 people to figure out what they did during their lives so I could put into context his words, their actions. So that's something that I want to make sure that you understand, that it's not just his words. So that is a picture of DeBow in his his late 20s. There's only really three pictures of DeBow, but this is probably the best. So every month, that's what you've gotten in the mail if you lived in Mobile and you subscribed to DeBow's Review. So today I wanted to focus how I talk about context. And for me, the word that I wanted to bring up today, that I want you to think about, as people who like history, or at least like eating lunch while they listen to someone talking about history, is I want to give you the word shaping or reshaping. All right, because DeBow wanted to shape. He wanted to reshape the South. He wanted to make the antebellum, or the period before the war, he wanted to make the South a better place. And he had very definite ideas about how to make the South a better place. So keep that in mind as I go through. And so, when you think the Old South, when you think the antebellum South, most of you have been poisoned by Gone with the Wind. And that is, everyone thinks that the Old South looks a certain way. All right? And for 1% of 1%, that way is exactly the way it looked. All right? But for the majority of you in this room, you would not have been living on 12 Oaks. You wouldn't have been getting dressed for a barbecue and starving yourself so you can get into your dress. That you would have been working. You would have been living like you are today. And so, what shapes DeBow? This is very important. All right? DeBow was shaped by things that are typically not seen as Southern when it comes to the Old South. DeBow was born in 1820, all right, in Charleston, South Carolina. And so DeBow was a city boy. All right? DeBow came from a merchant, a very prominent, not prominent, but a good solid middle-class merchant who did nothing but well. All right? Didn't do great, didn't tank, just did exactly what he had to do to support his family. And DeBow was, like I said, was born in 1820. And this was an important time in Charleston. Right? Charleston, South Carolina was really the capital of Southern culture. And so DeVoe comes from a urban middle-class family, has nothing to do with plantations, has nothing to do with cotton, has nothing to do with slavery. Just a person who is born into a family at the exactly wrong time to be born in Charleston, South Carolina. And the reason I say that is that in 1820, right, you can see here, the Panic of 1819 was a financial panic. Right? It was one of the first large financial panics in the United States, and it was a terrible, terrible, the Great Depression of the 20th century type of event. And so for DeVoe's father, he quickly finds out that when banks begin to call in loans, the banks that call in loans are going to be the ones that are calling in loans not only for him, but his customers, and his business goes belly up very quickly. DeVoe's father has to declare bankruptcy, and in 2 years dies, a broken man. So you take the Panic of 1819, and on top of that, you add a little controversy called the Missouri controversy, or the Missouri Compromise, which is, for some of you that might know this, the Missouri Compromise was really the way that the country tried to focus on how to find a solution to find out if Missouri is going to be free or slave. That's boiling it down to its simplest form. You don't have to know what it's really about as much as what you have to know what it does to Charleston, South Carolina. And that it makes Charleston, South Carolina the headquarters for the Southern nationalists who begin to see slavery as the defining issue of their lifetime. On top of that, you add the Denmark-Vesey plot, which was a potential slave uprising that is busted up, caught before it begins. But this puts Charleston on pins and needles. White Charlestonians are worried to death that black slaves are going to rise up and kill them all. And so you take financial panic, you add a little bit of slave riot, then you add the whole slave issue with Missouri, and you have a city wide open. Charleston, South Carolina is an international city that suddenly slams shut. Right? These people want nothing to do with the outside. The postmasters are instructed to cut off anything that might create problems with from abolitionists at the post office. Don't deliver whatever you get. The city closes down. DeVoe is part of this city growing up. On top of that, Manifest Destiny. Okay? Manifest Destiny, the drive westward, is going to make Charleston, South Carolina a ghost town. By the 1820s, Charleston itself, the city of itself, was losing a couple thousand residents a year to people just leaving to come places like here. South Carolina loses about 60,000 residents a year for almost 10 years. As people move into South Carolina, they move out. And so what you're beginning to see is that DeVoe's city, the shaping of DeVoe, is predicated on financial disaster, slave, kind of angst about slavery in many different ways, and then on top of that, this need to compete with this growing Western empire. And so that's what shapes DeVoe from the outside. What shapes DeVoe from the inside? All right? This is the other picture that is the kind of the two big pictures of DeVoe. DeVoe grew up without a father after his father died in 1825. His mother is going to pass away in 1832. So he is now left without parents. His older brother dies the year after that. His younger brother dies the day after his older brother. So DeVoe is now left without much of a family. And so he now has to go out and make a living at the ripe old age of about 13. And so he decides that he has to do what anyone that has to do something, and that's go out and do it. So he takes a job as a stock boy at a liquor store, kind of a liquor dry goods market. He does it for a while, and he actually keeps a journal about it, and he can't stand it because it's so boring. And so he quits, all right? Not too surprising for a kid that age. He decides the best way of making a living in the South is, you know what, I'm going to become a planter. Not fully maybe thinking that one out. He goes out to his uncle's farm, says, hey, I want to become a planter like you. His uncle says, are you crazy? This is like the worst way to make a living ever. So poor DeVoe, in the shaping of DeVoe, he never starts this one. His uncle suggests that he goes to a vocational school and maybe get a trade. So he goes to a vocational school run by the Methodist, and he does about 3 weeks of it, hates it, decides that he'll just stay for the rest of the time, and hey, why not have a good time? He does, and fails out. So at this point, if I'm doing a book on someone, at this point, there's not much of a book unless I'm writing about failure. He goes back to Charleston, he goes to a party, He's had a little too much to drink. He backs into a guy, spills the drink on the guy. The guy challenges him to a duel, and DeBow says, "Are you crazy? You kill me." So he even fails at death. As a duelist, he chickens out before his career starts. So right now, there's not much to talk about DeBow, except DeBow has one talent that he loves, and this is the talent that allowed me to get into his mind, and that is he loves being a writer, and he gets a job at the local newspaper, except he has the 16, 17-year-old gall audacity to criticize John C. Calhoun in print, and I can tell you right now, that's not a good thing for a young, up-and-coming writer in South Carolina. He is shamed out of his job in the newspaper, so at this point, this is not the start of a good story. He's sitting in a park bench. In fact, I found the park when I went to Charleston. He's sitting in a park bench, and he said, in his journal, he writes, "I don't know what else to do. Like, I am a loser." All right. And so he's sitting there looking in a newspaper, and he sees a little advertisement: College of Charleston, $50 for the year, any classes you want. He goes to the College of Charleston, and for $50, he goes out. Gets enrolled in the College of Charleston, and in 3 years graduates as his first valedictorian. The first valedictorian at the College of Charleston. In fact, he does so well that the newspapers, the businesses that are nearby, that are in Charleston, want him to write for them. So he goes from being this kind of this outcast to suddenly being the young up-and-coming guy. So he graduates in 1845 and decides, like a lot of people, like, you know what, I want to go out and see a little bit of the world. And so in his mind, he has an idea. I want to write, and I want to educate Southerners, but I don't know how quite yet to do it. And luckily for him, John C. Calhoun was going on a trip to Memphis, Tennessee, to give a talk at a conference, and DeBow gets on the ship with Calhoun, and the two strike up conversation, and Calhoun says, what we need is a good Southern journal that is not about literature, that's not about the petty things in life, that's about economic development. We need good, solid writing, good, solid ideas. And what you're going to see is DeBow gets off the boat in New Orleans and decides, you know what, I'm going to start my new life right here in New Orleans. 1845, he comes up with the idea of creating DeBow's Review as a resource for Southerners. And so for DeBow, he is in the exact right spot you'd want to be able to do this. This is the second largest port in America. It's the largest port in the South. Every one of those little dots represents 2,000 bales of cotton being produced in that particular area. And as many of you know, that cotton comes downstream to New Orleans or downstream to Mobile. And so for DeBow, this is a wonderful place to begin the process of writing a journal that he hopes will begin educating Southerners on how to improve the South. And so what does he want to do? Early on, he has very, very clear points he wants to make to Southerners. Right? Number one, we need to industrialize more. We need more factories. We can't rely on the North for everything. We have to out-Yankee the Yankees. Number two, we need more cities. All right? We need more cities, and we need more people living in cities. All right? This helps us do things. Memphis, Tennessee is a perfect example of what he wants. An inland port that will then take cotton from the middle of Tennessee and Alabama and be able to ship it down to New Orleans, all right, creating this kind of this interspersed network of cities. So he's a very big proponent of cities. On top of this, why waste your time using old tricks that don't work in the fields? Why not embrace scientific farming as part of what you do? He wants to reach out to the largest planters and teach them how to maximize their profits. On top of that, he wants to educate the students of Alabama, sorry, I'm going into Alabama speak here, the South. He wants to have public schools for kids. They go out to, they attend, they become good working citizens with a good background in the things that they need. Commerce, obviously, is a big part of this. And lastly, be proud of your region. Originally, he starts off as an American who's proud of the South. As you're about to find out, he's about to flip-flop and become a Southerner who's ashamed of the United States. And so that's going to fundamentally change his voice and his message. And it's important to understand that. It's important to understand that for a lot of Southerners, they begin to read DeBow's Review as a positive force of change. And by the end, as we're about to find out, he becomes a snarky, kind of ill-mannered, bad-tempered Southern nationalist fire eater who wants nothing to do with the United States. And so there's going to be a really drastic transformation here. So when I did my research, right, and this is the great part about computers, I can put it all into a spreadsheet and then I can have something spit out at the end of it that allows me to see what DeVoe's readers looked like, right, in the larger format. 90% of them were Southern. Not shocking that it was a Southern newspaper, or a Southern journal. The 10% who didn't come from the South were mostly merchants of New York City who dealt with the South. Right? So it's important to realize that the merchants of New York are as interested in cotton and Southern issues as many Southerners are. As a Southern journal, it's mostly a lower Southern journal. The Upper South, there are subscribers, but for the most part, as you can see here, almost 75% of readers come from the Deep South. The breakdown, merchants, professionals, planters, and industrialists. Right, an interesting breakdown. For a lot of you, you've been taught that the Old South consisted of moonlight, magnolias, and mint juleps. All right, that might have existed, but for DeVoe, he had no time for those things. And he didn't want you to have time for those things. He wanted you to think about progress, he wanted you to think about commerce, and he wanted you to think about moving forward as quickly as possible, because what he saw was, if we could become economic partners with the North, then we become political partners with the North, rather than them being able to lord over us with what they want. So you take this, that's the largest that's the large subset. This is what it looks like in Alabama, all right? That most of his readers come from the large cities in Alabama. To give you an idea, Montgomery, Marion, Mobile, Cahaba, there's still a Cahaba, Huntsville, Selma, Utah are the largest. In Mobile, there are 17 readers. Now realize, there are a lot more readers out there, but this is from my sample of 1,500 people. There are 17 readers from Mobile. To give you an idea, there's 10 from Huntsville. 81 from New Orleans, 78 from Charleston. So Mobile is not one of the larger, but if you look at some of the names of Alabamians here, all right, Daniel Pratt is the man who created Prattville. Albert Stein is up there on the wall between the guy in regalia, or next to the guy in regalia. A lot of these people became very significant players in Alabama politics, like Thomas Watt, or in Alabama industry. So he was speaking to the people who made decisions. He was speaking to people who had the money. He was speaking to people who had the inclination to change the South in some way. And it's important that you realize that. 21% owned slaves. That's probably higher. I'm sorry, that number's probably higher, but again, I'm relying on census data. And so the ones that did own slaves own a lot of slaves. Right? 37% of the readers of DeVoe's Review in Alabama own over 50 slaves. That's a huge, huge amount. Okay. The way I try to let students in my classes think about this is, at this point with inflation, the cost of a slave today would probably be around the cost of a Honda Accord, about $30,000 a slave, right? And so that's today's money, not their money. So think about that. That's like owning 50 Honda Accords and having to tend to them. They owned a lot of real estate, as you might imagine. They owned a lot of personal property. But if you look at the agricultural breakdown, 42% were farmers. Very, very large planters who actually mostly then, because they were so large, didn't live out in the fields. They lived out in towns like Huntsville, where they wanted to live in town. And so it's important that you realize that this is the top 1%, to steal maybe someone else's phrase. The 1% that are making the decisions. So, DeVoe's readers in Mobile. All right, some of these names might seem very familiar with you, others might not. I'm not from here, so they're only familiar to me in that I did the research. But John Aiken, lawyer, he was the editor of Alabama's first Law Digest. Josiah Knott, who's up here with the goatee. Albert Stein, who's up there. If you like water, if you like drinking water, that's your guy. That's the guy who created Mobile's first fully integrated water system. All these men were, and John Forsyth, some guy, I don't know who that was, I think someone back there might know, Lonnie Burnett, who wrote a book about John Forsyth, one of the preeminent, if not the preeminent newspaper editors in the South, was a friend of DeBow's. And so this was something that was very natural in these people interacting with each other. Lastly, Charles LeBaron was another railroad man. These were the people who could do what DeBow wanted to do. But the deal was he had to convince them to do it. So I wanted to kind of give you, the title is Faces of Mobile. Well, not all faces are portraits. Right? I wanted to show you what research looks like in the census. Right? So this is William D. Dunn. This is the Mobile, Ohio president's family. This is what a census return looks like in 1860. All right, so you go through these, and you'll find William D. Dunn, age 50, male, lawyer, owns $100,000 worth of real estate, $50,000 worth of personal belongings, which includes slaves. Born in Tennessee, and then you can see down below his wife Louisa, his kids, 3 kids, or 4 kids. One of them's in school. This is how you begin the process of doing research. Right? This is the fun part. It may not look fun, but this is actually the fun part, is finding these readers and finding out who they were. This is what the Dunn family looked like on paper. Right? This is what the Dunn family looked like within the big house. But I also want to remind you something else. This was also the Dunn family. All right? Dunn owned, I didn't count, I think probably, 12, 13 slaves. All right? In the 1860 census. A slave didn't even have the dignity of being able to have a name or an identity. You got a slash mark, you got a gender, you got a age, and you got a color. All right, B for black, M for mulatto, and this is the way it was. All right, so this is also part of Dunn's family, like it or not. And so it's important that you realize that there are people who have, okay, and there are people who don't have. But the people who don't have are still doing what Mobile, what Alabama, and what the South needs to be done, the work. And so when the people of Alabama and Mobile begin to think about progress, this is probably going to be one of the bigger projects out there. The Mobile and Ohio Railroad is going to link Mobile, Alabama, with the Ohio River in Illinois. And so for many, many people, this was going to change everything. Because now we could link the two regions together. We could create regional unity through economics. DeBow was big on this type of thing. So it's important that you realize that part of the portrait, part of the face of William D. Dunn, is that he ends up being the president of this for over 20 years. He is going to be the one that drives a lot of the changes. He's going to be one of the major players in downtown Mobile's renaissance. All right? In fact, DeBow is going to, in 1850, at the behest of Dunn, he comes to Mobile, and in DeBow's review, he comments about the city. And he said it's a city of matchless beauty, unrivaled wealth, and unsurpassed commercial advantage, and gives a fresh energy and will to the people. So when he came here, he saw nothing but positives. Right? He saw nothing but the potential of Mobile, Alabama. To give you an idea, the city's going to grow from 20,000 in 1850 to almost 29,000 in 1860, a 42% growth rate of the city in 10 years. To give you some context, Memphis, Tennessee is going to grow 155%. Charleston, South Carolina is going to shrink 6%. So you're right in the middle of the idea of Memphis being this incredible new city that's growing along the banks of the Mississippi River, as opposed to the dying city of Charleston, South Carolina. So DeBow comes here and he wants to meet with his subscribers and friends, and becomes very good friends with this guy, Josiah Knott, who again is up there, and Knott is going to be one of the major medical minds of the South, right? He uses a science, I don't usually do air quotes, but he uses a science of looking at slaves and looking at black people back then that they're not humans yet. So, for him, it's more of an anthropological study. He's looking at craniums, he's looking at bone structure, he's looking at history, he's looking at culture to prove that the black person is closer to the ape than it is to the classical European mind. And so he spends a lot of time doing this. DeBow loves it. All right? DeBow is all about this, because DeBow is all about slavery. Right? That's the one thing that won't change for a long time. So you've catered now to one of the largest industrialists in the city, in Dunn, one of the most preeminent scientists, medical guys in the South, and not. I'm sorry for the bad picture. I blame the museum for not, if I knew anybody's up there, I would have asked someone to take a picture for me. But what you see here is Albert Stein for the most of the city, someone who is going to be a godsend. And that is someone who is going to use his skills as a civil engineer to creating water, a pipe system throughout the city. Part of it's iron, part of it is actually wood. So logs that are fitted together and water goes through them. He also is going to be one of the founders of St. Paul's Episcopal Church in Spring Hill. And so, again, it's not just about the economy, it's not just about slavery, it's also about community building, and that's important to realize. All right. On top of that, DeBow is going to meet with this guy who I already talked about. If you want to read a good book, you can talk to the guy in blue back there, Lonnie Burnett, who wrote about John Forsyth, and he can tell you a lot more than I can, except I can tell you this. The minds work together quite well. DeBow and Forsyth were friends, were friendly, but also kindred spirits in many ways, especially in the 1850s. So when DeBow gets here, all right, he gets here in 1850 and he comes back in 1859, this is a relatively small town, city, compared to what it is today. DeBow very quickly, though, realizes that Mobile is exactly what he wants. All right, it's a prosperous commercial city that values the kind of the integrity of what a city should be. And in 1859, he mentions that he comes in and he makes a comment about the good newspapers, 24 churches, and the best fire department in the country. So go figure that. You can put that on your Chamber of Commerce. Many banks and a sound and fair commercial spirit. He also, though, makes another comment in 1859, that one that made me chuckle, is that he talks about the enterprising lawyers, he talks about the eloquent physicians, he talks about the bankers, and then, this is in Bow's review, he talks about something else, and that is, in Mobile, our acquaintances included some of the most exquisite beauties of person and character. They have charm, which in dreams revisit us thoroughly, but enough. All right, so DeBow comes down to Mobile, Alabama, and notices the women. All right, at the time, his first wife, Caroline Poe, who was the niece of Edgar Allan Poe, had just passed away, and DeBow came down here for just kind of a visit and really enjoyed it. He mentions the women of Mobile a number of times. So I guess you could take that as a compliment for all the women in here. But DeBow began to sour on the idea of union. He began to sour on the idea of working with the United States, and instead what he wants is to make the South a better place outside of the United States. He wants to take the South and make it its own nation because he doesn't think that the North is dealing fairly with the South when it comes to things like the tariff, slavery, education, commerce, all these different things. He is more interested about creating a separate nation, and in fact becomes so impassioned by this that he becomes one of the South's most preeminent fire eaters. All right, someone who is going to take Southern nationalism to the next level. And so it's not too shocking that in 1860, when the presidential election of 1860 occurs and Abraham Lincoln is elected president, DeBow is beyond ecstatic. He campaigned for Lincoln because he wanted the South. He knew that if Lincoln was elected, the South was going to succeed. South Carolina was going to succeed. So for him, it sounds very counterfactual or counterintuitive. He saw Lincoln as the exact thing that he needed. And so December 20th, 1860, the vote is going to be had on secession, and it's going to be, I think, 169-0 for secession. DeBow is there for the vote to watch it, and he publishes that very next month in DeBow's review, 99 in the 100 of the Southern people were devoted to the Confederacy, gloried in its achievements, and doubted not an instant of its just cause. He was so excited by the fact that the South had now taken the first step, and as we all know, much of the South is going to secede, and DeBow is going to be waiting breathlessly for what his post or what his job will be in the Confederacy. Unfortunately for him, what he's going to realize is that there's not much need for someone who can write a journal as maybe he thought. And so, in fact, what he's going to find out is when he goes to get his job in the Confederacy, they make him a tax collector. And he's kind of taken aback by this because this is beneath him, below him, but he's going to do his job. But what he also recognizes very quickly is that there's another major problem that he had not thought through, and that is the South truly ready to secede from the Union? And very quickly, he found out, no. He had promised Southerners, if you secede, the rest will follow. And what he realized is that the South could only make or produce or fabricate 233 of the 631 known fabricated items in the United States in 1861. So what that means is, if a spring on a train on the Mobile and Ohio Railroad breaks, no one in the South knows how to make a new one. The springs were made in the North. So DeBow, being somewhat a little naive on this, at the beginning of the war, he begins to contact his friends in the North and says, hey, can you send us some springs for the railroads down? They're like, are you kidding me? We're at war. So not the way you want to start your war. Another problem, the Memphis and Charleston was the only railroad that went east-west that had a continuous line from the Atlantic to the Mississippi River, which makes a major issue if you're trying to get things from east to west instead of north to south. And so what DeBow begins to realize is that there's a whole lot of problems that he has to overcome in terms of keeping the troops, the morale up, that's what you want to call it. And so he's going to be he's going to continue to be the good editor, he's going to continue to pump his ideas, and he's hoping that the Confederacy can then maybe backfill the confidence that he has in it. But very quickly, what he realizes is that no, they really can't. That in 1862, New Orleans is going to fall without a fight. And in the next month, he mentions it as being a disgraceful loss. That how could the Southerners give up their most important port without a fight? He's going to then, say, hey, don't worry. We had a lot more of the Confederacy. They got lucky. They got one. The fall of Nashville, the Battle of Shiloh are going to kind of punctuate the fact that there are some problems that DeBow can't account for. And his readers who had listened and who had followed also began to wonder and question, what have we gotten ourselves into? And so DeBow, someone who woke up every single day, went down to the telegraph office to get the news, who read newspapers, who read books, who read magazines, who read anything he could get his hands on, who wanted to know information so he could spread it, suddenly realized that the newspapers of the South were dying as quickly as troops on the battlefield. In Virginia alone, there were 130 newspapers before the Civil War. By 1863, there were 17 left. And that was because of the federal blockade that encircled the South and began to squeeze the resources of the South. And so what you're going to begin to see is that newspaper paper is hard to find. Ink is hard to find. It's so hard to find, in fact, that by late 1862, DeBow can't publish the review anymore. And so he suspends the publication of DeBow's review and has to rely on something that he can't stand, and that is rumors. Right? And so he goes everywhere he can to find rumors. And when I show you where he's been during the Civil War, you're going to get to see what I mean here. So he has to rely on rumors, right? And this is driving him insane. Rumors, we have nothing but rumors, is one of his letters. That's basically all it said, because he couldn't get a grasp of what was going on. His whole life had been dedicated to informing people, and suddenly he wasn't informed. So this is what the South looked like during the Civil War. All right, so you're going to have to follow the little bouncing red star here. So I'm going to show you what DeBow's life during the Civil War looked like. All right, so this is a perfect example of what war does to a family, to a person, to a career, to a life. DeBow is going to actually, he's going to get remarried in 1860. He's going to get remarried to a beautiful young planter's daughter who owns a plantation that some of you may have heard called Belle Meade. Anybody hear of Belle Meade? Okay, outside of Nashville. So DeBow is going to go to Belle Meade, and he goes, wow, I think this fits me much better than New Orleans. So he's going to take a house at Belle Meade. And so we're going to start our Civil War, our trip of the Civil War here, if I get the bouncing red star to work. We're going to start it in Nashville. All right, you all see the little red star there? So we started in Nashville. So DeBow begins the Civil War in Nashville. Everything looks great. He's on a plantation. And then Union troops begin to threaten New Orleans. So he's going to move back to New Orleans to get his stuff just in time before federal troops take over the city. Federal troops actually know him well enough. They go to his house and they torch it, throw out his library onto the street, and kind of get a good chuckle out of that. He gets out of New Orleans in time. But the problem is, when he's in New Orleans, Nashville falls. So now he doesn't have a home in New Orleans, and he doesn't have a home in Nashville. So DeBow is going to then decide to take a railroad and go up to Richmond and see what he can do in Richmond. Finds out that everyone else had the same idea. Richmond's too full for his taste. So he's going to take him and his family down to Columbia, South Carolina. And if any of you have been to Columbia, South Carolina, you may have had the same reaction he did. He wanted out. He goes back to Charleston, South Carolina. Home was always a good place, except there are a whole lot of Union troops just outside of Charleston. So he's going to go to what now is Atlanta. Atlanta doesn't really have much of anything, so he kind of decides to go on from there. He moves down, he goes to the middle of nowhere, Florida, and realizes that middle of Florida is kind of like Columbia, South Carolina. He wants out. Goes over to Jackson, Mississippi. Union troops are too close for his taste, so he takes another train from Jackson, Mississippi, and goes to Columbus, Mississippi. If any of you have been to Columbus, Mississippi, he lived on the campus of the Women's College in Columbus, Mississippi for a while before Union troops show up. So then he goes to Montgomery. All right, goes to Montgomery, realizes there's not much going on in Montgomery. Then he goes to Meridian, Mississippi, has the same kind of feeling about Meridian. Then goes to Selma, can't find much to do in Selma, and so finally decides that maybe, I don't know, North Carolina. He moves to North Carolina, but it's too far out. There's nothing going on in North Carolina, and he is going to eventually show up in Mobile, Alabama. There you go. He remembered it from his past, liked it enough to stick around, plus Union troops weren't going to be here until later in the war. So for DeBow, that's what the Civil War looks like. That's what the most prosperous Southern editor of the antebellum South, the most trusted voice, regional voice in the South looked like on paper. Right? That's what disruption of war looks like. That's what a bad idea, secession, looked like. Right? He had preached secession. He had preached that if we secede, things will work. Right? He lied. He was mistaken. Right? Or however you want to call it. He realized in 1863 that he'd made a big, big mistake, and he felt very, very guilty about this. I know this is horrible, a lot of reading. I know you guys are probably like, man, I'm on my lunch break, not my reading break. But he realized that the only way that the South could conquer the North would be to basically wear them down. All right? And he writes a number of letters saying, okay, instead of fighting battles, how about we all just go to the hills, and every time a Yankee walks by, we'll take a shot at him and go back and, pretend we're eating breakfast. Let's not make this a war of big battles, but let's make this a war of attrition. On the civilians, he has the most guilt, genuine guilt in his letters about what he has done to the Southern people. And he feels horrible about the fact that women and children are now forced to travel around the South without homes just like him. And this is something that weighs on him heavily. He writes a lot about it. By 1865, the sad delusion vanished, the delusion of Southern independence and secession. When in a territory 1,000 miles in length and as much in breadth, armed bands of blue coats were everywhere discovered, sweeping from the mountain to the sea, from the river to river, sacking and plundering and devastating, burning villages and ravaging estates. DeBow was contrite, DeBow was sorry, and DeBow wanted to make it up to the Southern people. By 1864, he knew the South had lost, was not interested in another person dying, because he had helped create that. And so it's important that you have to be aware of the fact that he had human emotions. Right? A lot of times I think we take the emotion out of public figures. Right? And in this case, he felt that he owed the South something. But as the war was ending, he also realized that there was a big problem, all right, and that his name was synonymous with secession. So the Nashville Daily Union is going to publish, DeBow should be rammed down a big cannon and should be executed without the benefit of clergy. To catch and punish the scoundrel would, I have no doubt, be agreeable to God and all good men, but there is catching him before we can shoot and hang him. But my favorite, when I came across this was my favorite, is that a Milwaukee newspaper publishes in big, bold letters, we should hang up fiddle while we hang up DeBow. That one caught his attention. That one caught his attention, and in fact, DeBow, like a lot of Southerners, actually contemplated moving out of the country. Go to Mexico, go to Brazil, go anywhere. All right. In fact, I just got back from Costa Rica, 2 weeks in Costa Rica yesterday, or the day before. I've lost track of my days. And I can say this: is if I was DeBow, I probably would have moved somewhere myself after having been where I was. But he felt so guilty about what he had done, he decided that he was going to stick it out and do what was right and stay in the South and not leave. In fact, General Robert E. Lee is going to write him a letter and say it's your duty. And so, you know, if you've read enough about Lee, if Lee says it's your duty, I guess you have to do it. And so, in DeBow's mind, he has to do it. But this is something that I want to make sure you all understand. All right, for a lot of people, when I talk to a lot of groups, DeBow lived through the Civil War. It was one of the main causes of secession from the editorial side of things. This is actually a picture of Mobile after the war. DeBow is going to write a public letter to the South, and he's going to be very clear. Furl that banner, the Confederate flag, it is best, for there's not a man to wave it, and there's not one left to love it. The struggle is now over, but its deeds belong to the American name. They can't be obliterated. Let us read of it as of the events of 100 years ago. What he's telling the South is, get over the Civil War. Stop thinking about it. Let's move forward, let's not move backwards. All right? And for a lot of people, that's a hard pill to swallow. All right? In 1865, 1866. He is going to tell the South, he is going to tell Southerners in the first issue after the war, January 1866, I made a horrible mistake. Slavery is a sin and is a terrible thing, and now I see it. And I think we should educate every ex-slave as best we can, because if we don't, they're going to drag us down. Now realize that comes from a self-serving point of view. All right? But what he is saying is we need to educate every black person we can to make them equal citizens. I'm sorry for what I did. I'm sorry to the United States. I'm sorry to the South. I'm sorry to everyone that I led down that path. So think about that. A lot of you, myself included, I mean, that's a big thing to do, to say I'm sorry in front of everyone that has listened to you. All right? And so for him, he only sees the positives. All right? And this goes back to the shaping of DeBow, the post-war. He's going in 1866, his first article, even in the most terrible hours of the war, he still sees Southern ideas, Southern minds, Southern people as a very, very positive group of individuals who can overcome what had happened. And so DeBow is beyond ecstatic. The fact that the slate has now been cleaned. All right, now slavery is gone. We don't have to even talk about that anymore. And in fact, if you want to know what DeBow's legacy looks like, I can give you a very good example. All right, so when I'm doing my research in DeBow's review, all right, I have a whole lot of names, and I begin to put the names together, and what I realize is I have the perfect legacy of DeBow. And that legacy is this, is that a number of DeBow's readers, all right, Daniel Pratt, James Sloss, Samuel Tate, Bowling Hall, and James Gilmer, all pre-Civil War readers of DeBow's review, are going to get together and create a land company, the Elington Land Company. Does anyone know what the Elington Land Company created? Birmingham, Alabama. All right, the readers of DeBow's review create the land company that creates Birmingham, Alabama, a new South city formulated around DeBow's pre-Civil War, Old South, or antebellum South ideas. They take those ideas and they make them their own, and they create Birmingham, Alabama. So that's what a legacy looks like. If you want to look at what a legacy looks like more locally, all right, in Mobile, this is going to come out, I think, in the 1880s, 1886. I hope no one here knows. I'll just say 1886, and you can email me if I'm wrong. 1886, this magazine is going to, or this journal is going to come out about Mobile for trade or commerce or industries, manufacturing. And listen, Mobile's about to take a big hit across the face after the Civil War. This is not going to be a good place to live after the Civil War. Yet, Mobile is still the kind of city that DeBow sees as the future. And so when you read the little blurb that comes with it, Mobile is going to become the ideal city, that if we could just do it. And so for DeBow, he was hoping places like Memphis and places like Mobile and places like Charleston could do what had to be done and get over it. And so when you open this up and you look at this, it's more of a city directory. I couldn't think of the word. It's more of a city directory. The first business listed in the city directory is LeBaron and Son. Charles LeBaron, a DeBow reader, is going to be the first person in the leading business houses of Mobile, right? A antebellum business leader that read DeBow's review is the first person listed here as a commission merchant and dealers in cotton and lumber, right? This is exactly what DeBow had hoped for, is that the leaders of the pre-Civil War South would rise up and start beginning the process of recreating the South around a better image. And so many of you are familiar with the term the New South, right? And so for me, in my research, what I realized is that for many people, a lot of you know the name Henry Grady or Henry Watterson. Many of you may know elements of the New South, and many of you may see the New South as a strictly post-Civil War event or an idea. What I argue in my book and what I argue in my research is that no, if you look at what DeBow did from 1846 to 1865 or 1862, is that what DeBow did was he created a set of ideas that told Southerners, if you begin to manufacture more, if you begin to educate your people, if you begin to farm smartly, if you begin to create a network of cities, if you begin to do the things that modern societies do while maintaining your basic ideas and your basic institutions, then we'll succeed. And so DeBow is really, in my mind, the first person who has a uniform and accessible ideal plan for the New South. So a lot of you may ask, so how come I've never heard of J.B. DeBow? How come his name isn't up there with other names? How come we don't know about his contributions? And part of that is because the South lost. Right? The South lost the war, and DeBow's ideas before the Civil War were the ideas of the side that lost. So the Union had no real use for that, so it wasn't like they were going to prop it up. But there's also another issue, and that is in 1867, DeBow is going to take a train to New Jersey, and on the way to New Jersey, he dies of an acute attack of peritonitis in New Jersey, in Elizabethtown, New Jersey. Never been there, don't want to speak ill of it, but he dies there. Right? They don't know what to do with him, but they know who he is. So they get a casket, they put him in the casket, and all they write on it is "Return to the South." Okay? So they put him on a southbound train. DeBow heads back down south and disappears into history. They don't know where he's buried. Now here's what I think. So this is the counterfactual programming of the talk here. All right, and that is what most likely happens is if you die somewhere that you're not from, what are they going to do with your body? They're going to ship it to what you consider to be home. His family still lived in Belle Meade, and so what I think happens is that he goes home. He eventually finds Belle Meade. They bury him in a family plot. And if any of you have been to Belle Meade lately, my guess is, so where is DeBow now? My guess is he's probably under a driveway, a basketball court, or a house. He's probably buried somewhere underneath the suburban sprawl of Nashville. All right, well, thank you very much. I appreciate your time. And